When I reached Greymoor, combat suddenly felt harder. Not impossible, but every enemy pushed me further than anything I'd faced before. Progress slowed down, deaths started piling up, and I couldn't quite figure out why. Until this point, my general strategy had been pretty straightforward. I'd attack enemies from the front, and when the opportunity presented itself, I'd jump and dash over them to land hits from behind. That approach had worked well for me for most of the game. But enemies like the Silk Snipper made that more difficult. They could block frontal attacks with their scissors, and I found I had to be much more patient looking for clear openings. Every fight felt like more effort than it should have been. So I decided to experiment. I was looking for anything that might give me an edge, and that's when I was reminded of the diagonal pogo attack. I discovered this move right at the beginning of the game, and then, truthfully, I'd ignored it almost entirely. The move always felt awkward to me. The timing was strict, it required multiple inputs, and compared to my usual playstyle, it just felt uncomfortable, so I avoided it. But since I was already struggling, I forced myself to try it against the Silk Snipper. At first it felt clumsy, I mistimed jumps, missed attacks, and I had to consciously remind myself to go for it. But almost immediately I noticed something important. The Silk Snipper attacks horizontally, which means an aerial downward angled attack is exactly what it's vulnerable to. Even if it blocks the attack, you can still use the momentum of the jump to get behind it for more damage and hits. After a bit of practice, this enemy that had been slowing me down suddenly wasn't much of a problem anymore. I was killing Silk Snippers more consistently with this more aggressive playstyle. I felt like the hunter instead of the hunted. That was my first real aha moment. And it got me thinking. Dark Souls has roll, Sekiro has deflect. These are mechanics the game gives you immediately, not because they're easy, but because the entire combat system is built around them. So I started to wonder, was the diagonal pogo Silksong's version of that? The foundational combat mechanic the game expects you to learn even if you resist it at first? I wasn't sure, so I decided to test that idea. I went back to the early areas of the game, places I already knew well with enemy movesets I was comfortable with. That way I could experiment without constantly being punished for mistakes. What I discovered was more nuanced than I expected. Some enemies are clearly vulnerable to the diagonal pogo. The Skull Brute, for example, is so large that it's easy to stay airborne and chain multiple pogo attacks without touching the ground. Against enemies like this, the move feels incredibly strong, almost like the game is rewarding you for using it. Other enemies though are clearly designed to push back against it. The vicious Carinid can be hit with the diagonal pogo, but if you keep going it raises a defensive shield that punishes you for overcommitting. And enemies like the Smelt Shoveler take things even further. Their helmets prevent the diagonal pogo from dealing damage at all. Interestingly though, Smelt Shovelers are excellent practice targets. My current record is chaining 6 diagonal pogo attacks on one before landing, and with more practice I'm confident that number could go up even higher. There's also another layer once you unlock the Drifter's Cloak that allows you to hover in the air. This ability lets you stay airborne longer, reposition and then chain additional pogo attacks, giving you more control and better attack opportunities. So no, I don't think the diagonal pogo is the answer to every fight in Silksong, but I do think it's a crucial part of the combat system. Some enemies resist it, some punish misuse, but others become dramatically easier once you understand how and when to use it. These days, whenever I encounter a new enemy, the first thing I test is how susceptible they are to the diagonal pogo. If they are, it immediately becomes a core part of my strategy. If you're struggling with combat in Silksong, I highly recommend taking the time to learn the diagonal pogo attack, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. Because once it clicks, the game opens up in a really satisfying way.